Yeah, so my name's Chuck Krimmer. I'm the head boot fitter at McHugh Sports. I started out in Washington, D.C., kind of as a military brat. Over the summertime, I found a job with a friend laying some carpet tiles at our local ski shop about a mile away from the Pentagon. And I did that for about a month, and I just kind of stayed, never left. So that's kind of how I got into it when I was a teenager. So I'm going on 30 some odd years as a boot fitter now in that neighborhood. Worked pretty extensively through high school into college at West Virginia University, did a little bit of racing there, moved to Colorado, ran a ski shop there, worked with a lot of racers as well, a lot of masters racers on the Front Range, and then moved up to up here in 2000, where I got a job at McHugh's. Been super fortunate to be there, learned a lot. We are fortunate enough to have a great race program here in Boise. Starting with all the little kids, working all the way up. Masters, yeah, it's coming around, but you know, huge kids program without a doubt. So, been fortunate enough to do that. Gone through a lot of you know, extensive training with manufacturers, given a little bit of input there. Masterfit University, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's who I am. I am going to refer to a few of my notes so I don't go too much out of order. Question, how many of you own boots that are more than 5 or 6 years old?
Guilty.
Okay, gotcha. How many of you have to unbuckle your boots between runs? A few. Did I understand you're a racer? How many of you don't like the control that you have from your ski boots currently? Okay, good. The numbers are getting smaller. That's good. That's good. Did I sell boots to anyone here? That's what I want to know, hands there, if you're having problems. Fear of boot fitting. A lot of times people don't like to come into a shop for boots. You walk into a ski shop, the first thing that people gravitate towards is a ski wall. That's the glory end of it. That's a glamour end of it. Boots just really aren't sexy. But at the end of the day, that's really the most important part of the boot fit. If your feet aren't comfortable, you're not going to have fun, racing notwithstanding. But as a boot fitter, I'd probably guess that about 70% of the people that I deal with have very, very unhappy feet when they come to see me for the first time. A lot of them because they're going to buy boots at box stores, ski swaps, Craigslist, anything along those lines, which, you know, I understand, I get that. We have to deal with price. But at the same time, they're doing themselves a huge, huge disservice. And that's one of the issues in the ski industry is we need to focus on customer retention, if you will. People go to rent skis, rent boots for the first time, their feet hurt. Do they really want to go out and spend money to buy? Not necessarily. So if their friends or instructors actually convince them to go buy a pair of boots, then they're probably going to try to mitigate their costs by going and buying something that isn't going to be appropriate for what they actually need, which is certainly an issue that I see without a doubt. We know the beginners have very, very different needs than expert skiers, right? Beginners, balance isn't all that good. Their friends, their instructors, they're telling them to lean down the hill, which is very, very counterintuitive. So they try to cheat a little bit by taking their torso, bending it forward, which takes their rear end, brings it straight back, and everyone's seen these people, without a doubt. When that happens, all your weight goes directly under your heels.
That's the booty whip.
There it is. You know, not good for skiing, without a doubt. You know, as soon as your weight goes back on your heels, you don't get any tip pressure, and nothing good happens. So I do find myself, to an extent, being an instructor to a lot of the instructors when they come into the store. This is where a little bit of a participation comes into play. So I'm hoping everyone's willing. I want everyone, because everyone here takes friends out, takes beginners out, but everyone, please stand up for me in front of your chair. This will be quick, but it's just a quick demonstration. So if you go to sit down on your chair, your tush goes back and you feel where the weight is on your feet. It's typically right at your heels, right? That's not what we want. Instead, what I want you to think about, We always tell our friends, bend your knees, bend your knees. Well, when you go to sit down, you're bending your knees. That's really not what we want. Instead, what I want everyone to think about, don't worry about your knees, bend your ankle. When you bend your ankle, feel where your center of gravity is. It's a little bit further forward towards the balls of your feet. That's what we want. It's a kinetic chain that we're working towards. So if the ankle joint is static, we're not going to be where we want. Thank you, everyone. But if we do bend at the ankle, everything from there up follows in suit, which means our hips stay directly over our feet, which is really what we want. Our torso will stay more or less over our feet as well. If we can create that epiphany for those beginners or people coming to that next plateau, that's where they're going to get it, without a doubt. What I find as my primary job is to convey an understanding of what ski boots do, how they do it, why pick this boot over that boot, et cetera, et cetera. I get people that come in all the time. What's the best boot on the wall? The one that fits, of course. What do you ski in? Doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Biomechanically, we all have different needs. You look at all the shoe companies that are out there, Asics, Nike, Reebok, Adidas, Puma, whoever, you can name them all. They all have a different concept of what the proper fit is. Boot manufacturers are the exact same thing. If I ask everyone in here what the average foot shape is, I'm going to get 40 different answers. Because there is no right or wrong, without a doubt. Fortunately, manufacturers have really come a long way over the last couple of years. And you have to understand that boot technology has really been changing and influenced from ski technology. So if you think back to a little bit of history, straight skis, how do we have to turn them? Completely different than what we do now, right? We're using a lot of rotary motions with those straight skis, really trying to work the tips and the tails. We work on a few different planes on our body. From a technical standpoint, we'll work on what's called a frontal plane, which is this way. If we divide our body in half, along our hips, then that's your frontal. Sagittal plane typically will dictate our front to back motions. Rotational plane. And then the coolest one is the oblique plane. What that is, we get everything kind of working together as we want it. Early shape skis. Think of the Elan SGX, the S-Ski, if anyone remembers that, out of Aspen. Huge amount of side cut, right? Well, we're working really on our edging skills. At that point, boots, what we were trying to do is we were staying really far forward. We had a high ramp angle on them. Started to realize that we can soften the flex of the boot up a little bit. We didn't need it to be really a rock hard stiff boot like we did with the old Nordica Grand Prix with the pre-shaped skis, with straight skis. Early 2000s, rocker, a lot of rocker. Okay, using different things. Now we're basically skiing on something that's that long. Instead of a 200 centimeter ski, we're skiing on something that's 80 to 100 centimeters. Well, obviously we have to worry about that, but now we're really if you want to engage the tip, then you have to really lean forward. The way the boots are changing in that point is we can lower the cuff. We start to realize that we can maybe take that cuff and stand you a little bit more upright and make that flex softer, because most of those rocker skis, we're not driving from the tips as much. Today's modern skis, early rise, if you will, slight tip and tail rocker. It's kind of a cool thing. Now, we took all that knowledge from the past, stand more upright, take our heel, lower it down, which is our ramp angle. Don't need a real stiff boot longitudinally. We need something really stiff laterally, because that's how we're driving the ski. We're not worried as much about that. We're staying more neutrally stanced overall. Bottom line, we're in a really good place in the ski industry right now from a equipment standpoint, boots, skis, everything else. That brings to the question of the boot fit. What are we trying to achieve? What does a boot do? A boot, in my world, essentially has two different jobs. One, to be the most efficient transmitter of energy from the body through the boot down to the ski. The second, basically be a thermos, help keep you reasonably warm. Well, my job is to find a happy median between the two. Every body is a little bit different based on what their experience is, their biomechanics, their history of skiing, if you will. Again, going back to a beginner, if I put them in a race fit, not good, right? Their technique is all over the place, so they're gonna lean back, their toes are gonna jam, not gonna have a lot of fun. They don't need a stiff boot that'll just lock them up. We need to keep those ankles, a little bit looser. And their fit isn't quite critical. As you move up into the ability levels, skiing harder stuff, you really demand more control, right? How do we achieve that? Make that shell closer to your skin. We know that the closer the shell is to your skin, the more efficient it's going to be. Does that mean we're sacrificing warmth? No, not necessarily. That's where the boot companies have come into play, which I'll get into that a little bit more in depth. But beginner boots, how do they make them? Pretty inexpensive. They make them a cardboard box, not a lot of shape, pretty generic. They'll fit a narrow foot, they'll fit a wide foot. You're filling it with a bunch of carpet foam. Simple as that. As you move up, the shells get a little bit more sculpted. Okay, so now, instead of having just contact, right up near the balls of the foot, you look at a lot of the modern shells, they actually look like a foot from the outside. They truly are sculpted. We've got an area for our ankle bone, our calcaneus, our navicular, which is that little bone right in front of your ankle bone. Sculpted out here for that sixth toe that a lot of people have. Sculpted here for that bunion that some of us have. Heel pockets, a little bit more off center, matches our human anatomy a little bit more effectively. The idea is, instead of having a lot of thick foam in some areas and thin foam in other areas, let's make an equal amount of foam everywhere, because the foot is as evenly placed in the center of the boot as possible. We know that foam is always going to compress and stretch to wherever the shell will allow it to. So if we have that rental boot, that beginner boot that we're getting into, that's that cardboard box, well, the foam's going to compress. It may feel tight when you first put it on, ski for it for 3 or 4 days, then you won't have any control. So what do you do to compensate? And everyone's seen this. Probably all of us have done this. Tighter and tighter and tighter. Then your foot gets cold. You're cutting off blood flow. It hurts. Not good. Not good. With a higher end boot, they are using better carpet foams built in here, and make no mistake about it, all these are is glorified carpet foams that they use in here. I brought this particular boot not because, well, it's pretty color, but I think this is one of the nicest sculpted liners out there. Thin foam everywhere, but again, you look at it, it looks like a foot. It truly does. If you go to buy carpet for your house, what's the one thing that salesperson is going to try to do? Upsell you into the carpet foam, right? It's not as much a carpet as it is the underlayment. Same thing here. This is a lot of what you're paying for, is the quality of the foam. Lower end boots, they use a softer foam, does a great job. It's generic fit. As soon as you get into a higher end boot, it's a much, much firmer foam that grips the foot, which means now with the proper fit, I can use nothing more than my pinky finger to tighten it. I still see people up on the hill, mostly ex-racers. I keep looking at you because you've been there. I don't know how many other people have raced competitively, but everyone tries to crank their buckles down. It's a bad habit we don't really need to do anymore unless you're racing. Why do they do that? It gets that shell closer to the foot. They're not as much concerned as much about the comfort as they are the performance. So modern boots, nothing more than your pinky finger on these bottom two. Top of the boot, as tight as what you want to make it. Our lower portion of the foot, and just like your hand, your nerves and blood vessels are very, very close to the skin. Doesn't take much pressure to cut off circulation. Up here, we have a little bit more tissue. We can squeeze it. We're probably not going to hurt anything. It's a general rule of thumb. So keep them loose down here, keep them tight down. Keep it tight up here. If your boots don't really meet that criteria, it may be time to look for a new boot. You may be skiing in too old of a boot that's just packed out. You may be skiing in the wrong size of boot that doesn't respect your anatomy. You may be a better skier than what that particular boot is designed for overall. First pair of boots that I sell to a beginner or someone coming off of lessons, I don't have a problem selling them a boot that's probably a size too large because, again, their technique isn't adequate. But I also put the seed in their head. All right, after your first 30, 40 skiing days, plan on seeing me here about a year and a half from now. Here's what we're going to be doing. So I'm setting the stage for their second, their third pair of boots overall. Talking about the history, I briefly mentioned ramp angle, if everyone caught that. Inside of all these boots, there is something called a boot board, which is the first trivia question of the day. Who can tell me what the term for boot board is? The technical term. Anyone? Oh, come on.
Sole.
What's that?
Sole.
Nope. Good guess. This thing? Nope. All good answers, but it's a much cooler name. This is called a Zeppa. It's cool. Now, if anyone can tell me without Googling it where the name came from, then you get a pair of footbeds. Zeppeland. No, actually, it's what it is. Zeppa is a family name of the Italian company that first started making these for Lang. But it's just a much cooler word to say than a boot board, to say the least. Now, modern skis, old skis, we used to stand up really, really high, called a high ramp angle. Typically, 6, 7, 8 degrees, trying to get you further forward over the fronts of the skis. Well, currently, drop that heel down. 3 to 5 degrees is a general rule of thumb. Why are we doing that? Well, the ski industry had this epiphany, and they started to realize that why do we tell people to stand with their feet together? Because it looks cool. Franz Klammer, made it look great. Ingemar Stenmark, beautiful skiing, but if you do that, you've got no balance overall. And as these skis have gotten wider with more shape to them, then you can't get them on the edge because you're actually being blocked out by your opposite knee. So they realized that every other sport out there, you have an athletic stance, your ready stance. Feet are roughly hip to shoulder width apart, knees are slightly bent, you're using equal parts skeletal versus muscle. Older boots lifted you further up, more forward lean on the cuff, you're bending your knees a lot more, lifting your heels up, so you're wearing high heels doing a wall sit. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Standing more upright, it's a lot easier on the body and just tends to work better with all the skis that are out there. So boots are influenced by the ski industry. Skis are influenced by boots to an extent as well. They have definitely worked hand in hand, without a doubt. 10 years-ish ago, Lang went to ASICS footwear company. All these footwear companies do a lot of foot scans to come up with what they feel should be their average fit. Lang said, we'd like to buy a whole bunch of your foot scans instead of doing them ourselves. So Lang bought 10,000 different foot scans and kind of redefined how a boot should be sculpted, if you will, into a modern stance. Every brand has done that since then. It's brilliant. So now, even though different manufacturers all have their own feelings on what the perfect fit is, they're all working under basically the same precepts, if you will, which everything is designed to be changed. We have certain ramp angles, certain forward leans. Well, how does that work with a given body? Since we all have different biomechanical capabilities, if you will, in terms of dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, how much our foot supinates or pronates, what kind of injuries you've had. Do you have bunions? Do you have pins, plates, screws, cables holding your leg together, whatever it may be? Well, those are all the things that we have to take into account from a boot fitting standpoint. Generally speaking, no matter what your skiing history is or your body history on your lower half of your leg, what we are trying to accomplish is we have 4 different tendons that we have to keep in equilibrium. Everyone's familiar with your Achilles tendon, right? We have a peroneal tendon, which runs down the back of your leg and underneath the outside of your ankle bone. We have your anterior tibialis, which basically, if you lift your foot up, you have that one tendon that's right on the top of your foot. That's basically what holds this portion down to this portion. Then we have your tibialis posterior, which runs under the inside of your foot, runs down the outside and then under your arch to your big toe. All of those tendons we have to have effectively a balance with. If we have any one of those tendons under tension one way or the other, then something is out of whack. And that's, hopefully no one's ever seen it, but has anyone ever seen someone slams into a bump, they hear this big, huge pop, and it wasn't a knee or a ski? It was probably their Achilles, because their Achilles was under tension too much, because that boot had too much forward lean for that person biomechanically. It popped as soon as they hit that, because their body kept going and their boot stopped. So our job via a foot assessment or lower leg assessment in history is trying to find out where that equilibrium or that balance is. Easiest way to explain it, everyone remembers the old Atari video game. We had that square box with a joystick sticking straight out the front. Well, if that joystick is our lower leg, you ought to be able to go forward, backward, right, left equally and have it come right back to neutral, if you will. That's all that we're trying to achieve from a performance standpoint and from a safety standpoint inside of that ski boot. If we can do that, that's where you're going to get your best performance out of it. Then, the quality of the fit is going to, at that point, be dictated by blood flow and, nerve issues, things along those lines, which are very, very doable as well. All ski boots come with one of these, an insole. Typically costs about a nickel, maybe a dime. Adequate for either a dog chew toy or makeup application. Either way, throw it away. Get a footbed. The footbed inside of the boot is the single best thing you can do for your body or for your skiing, without a doubt. Why do manufacturers even put these things in to begin with? Fair question. Every industry that sells any kind of footwear, shoes, hiking boots, skates, ski boots, they all have basically the same thing. They spend a lot of money on the outsole. They spend a lot of money on the midsole for tennis shoes and hiking boots, but they spend no money on the insole. They need it to be as generic as they can. You go to try a pair of boots on. What's the biggest deal breaker for us boot fitters? Your toes touch the front as soon as you slide in, right? Well, that we can fix because we know the liner is going to stretch out. But if we put something that has some good support from the factory instead of the dog chew toy, and your foot argues with it, well, we had just added 50 bucks to the price of the boot and you're going to throw this thing away anyway. What it's for is they want different shops, such box stores that sell these over-the-counter footbeds, to be able to throw them in and get rid of the insole, the stock insole, without offending you if they know what they're doing. Or if you're going to come to a boot shop, first thing we ask you when you walk in the door, did you bring your footbeds or your orthotics with you? Well, probably going to be custom made. So over the counter is great. If you can't afford anything more than that, custom is better because it's custom. When we do our foot assessment when you walk through the door, well, we have a couple different tests that we do that we have to check for, which we have to look at how much flexion you have, which we talked about a little earlier, how much arch mobility you have. It doesn't mean you have a high arch or a low arch. It means when I lift up your big toe, how much does your arch go up and down? That's really going to dictate to me what kind of custom footbed we're going to need to make for you. Floppy feet, a lot of people will associate that with pronation, if people are familiar with that term. Yes, they should have support. Pronation typically means that that arch is collapsed, your heel bone everts, your forefoot abducts, all kinds of bad things happen. Your shin, your tib fib, internally rotates so it doesn't line up with the shin of the boot. We need to get that back into whack. Boots are built around a biomechanically perfect foot. We don't have that. So the footbed, we can help control that to an extent and get that foot closer to that biomechanically accurate boot, if you will. You take someone with a super high arch or cavus arch with no arch mobility overall, essentially you need a cushion underneath them. Their body already has a lot of spring to it, so we need something a little bit softer. That floppy foot, we probably need something a little bit firmer in order, in order to get the proper alignment going. That balance that we were trying to achieve on all four planes, front, back, side, and side, if we don't have a footbed, throw it all out the window. You can have the perfect boot, perfect sizing, without the footbed, doesn't do any good whatsoever. So it starts with the footbed, then it moves to the proper shell, and then we go from there overall. Once we have the first footbed dialed in, well, we can modify shells, we can modify liners, there's all kinds of neat things that we can do at that point. Industry has allowed us to manipulate, modify, change for the better, sometimes for the worse, the fit of the overall boot. Cuff alignment and canting, I'm going to kind of brief over this. Bottom of the boot is flat to the surface of the earth. Everyone sees these things and they go, oh, that's a cant. It's not. It's called a cuff alignment. All we're trying to do is if your shin bones are bowed one way or the other, it allows us to line the cuff of the boot with your body. What a cant is, we're actually changing the angle of the bottom of the boot to the earth underneath of it. Again, without a footbed, useless. Without the proper fit, useless. That's your third step, adjust that. Fourth step is actually canting the boot. So big misnomer. That is a cuff alignment, it's not a cant overall. To close, the bitterness of ill-fitting equipment will long outlast the sweetness of the price that you paid. Food for thought. Any quick questions? Yes, sir.
Okay, so you mentioned a little bit in the beginning. When do you know you need to replace your goods, and how long does a footbed last? Because you said you bring in your own footbed. Can you keep carrying on and on?
Good question. Design life on a ski boot is about 100 skiing days. What is a skiing day? Could be an hour, could be 8 hours. In the back of your head, if the boot fitter asks you, hey, how many days skiing did you have last year? You just off the top of your head say 15 or 20. Okay, how long have you owned the boots? 7 or 8 years? You're probably due. Other more tangible methods, again, you find that you're having to buckle these down extremely tight, then that means that the foam where you weren't previously, or you're starting to feel random pains and pressures, probably a good time at that point to start thinking about a new pair of boots. Shells do last longer than what the liners will, no question about it, but by the time the shell is worn out, or the liner's worn out, the concepts and technology, thank you, have probably changed as well. Although there are a lot of aftermarket liners and things like that. Footbeds is definitely a little bit more subjective. I know my feet have changed over the last 10 years, so I don't wear the same footbeds. Will they go through 2 pair of boots? Probably. Let your boot fitter, find a boot fitter you can trust wherever you're at, wherever you live. A boot fitter can be your best friend, hopefully. So there's no tangible right or wrong answer to that. Yes, sir.
You were saying about the rocker skis and the latitude stiffness of if you're using rocker skis, should your boot shell be different than if you're using, say, a slalom ski or something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, traditional slalom and GS skis, race skis in general, are definitely designed to be driven a little bit more from further in front of you. If you buy a ski, or excuse me, buy a boot for those race skis, If you move to something that's a little bit more user-friendly on a rocker ski, you probably won't have the control that you're after. I'd use the boot, same boot for no matter what the ski is, but I'd base the boot initially off of the firmest snow ski that you're using. And then that same boot will work for all the softer skis from there.